Hey, everybody, welcome back to the channel that takes you deep inside the San Francisco 49ers. I am your host, Jack Hammer. And on this show, we want to talk a little bit about what we learned about 49ers quarterback Brock Purdy and the rest of the team during the 49ers' big 30-7 win over the Pittsburgh Steelers on Sunday out in Pittsburgh. It was a dominating performance. And, I think when you look at this game, there's a lot that you can take away from it, a lot of positives. There were a few negatives as well. But I think the overall view of this game is the positives. We'll get into those. But first off, I think the number one takeaway, if we just get this started off with the takeaway, the number one takeaway from the game, the thing that we learned about the 49ers in particular in this preseason game, in this game, was that we can't overreact to the preseason. I think that's the biggest thing. We get amped up throughout the offseason. Training camp gets here. We get excited for training camp. And then we get to the preseason games, and those preseason games are finally our chance to really see how this team is coming together, or so it seems. But really, it's not, especially when you look at who's on the field. The starters very rarely play. For the 49ers in particular, the starting offense played together just a couple of series. One series with Brock Purdy and the starting offensive line out in week 2 against the Denver Broncos. There were a couple series for that group the following week against the Los Angeles Chargers. On the defensive side of the ball, it was different. It was even different from that, in that the starters hardly played. I think the starters played one or two series against the Chargers, but even from that, you couldn't draw anything from it, because in the game against the Chargers, the starting offense looked great, the starting defense looked great, but at the same time, the defense and offense of the Los Angeles Chargers had almost all backups out there. So you couldn't really tell and really gain a whole lot from it, other than the fact that they were out there in their uniforms and that looked good. And like Shane says also, the schemes are very vanilla, very little game planning, might be trying new things. Those are all factors into it, especially when you look at the 49ers running defense, the 49ers run defense, right? The big topic going into week 1 for the 49ers was, can this run defense step up? Can they stop the run? Because they didn't do a very good job in the preseason. And that answer was yeah, absolutely. The 49ers defensive line, if you look at that game and you watch it through, that defensive front dominated throughout that game. Whether it was a pass or a run, they were dominating, but especially against the run. And it wasn't just one guy either. Clelin Ferrell in particular played really well, does a great job of setting the edge in this defense. When I was out in Vegas for the joint practices with the Raiders, I ran into the beast writer, Ryan Sakamoto, used to cover the 49ers. And one of the first things that he said to me was about the 49ers is, man, you're going to love Clelin Ferrell. That guy is a really good ball player. He's going to remind you of can't remember one of the players that was on the team back in 2012. Paris Harrelson actually is who it was. He says he's going to remind you a lot of Paris Harrelson. And if you remember Paris Harrelson from that 2011 team, I think he was there still in 2012. Paris Harrelson was a pass rusher who wasn't a very good pass rusher, but he was really good against the run. He was solid at setting the edge. And so Paris Harrelson was that guy that would come in on first and second down. He'd set the edge in that run game, and then they would take and they'd bring in Aldon Smith to rush the passer a little bit later. And that's what we saw in this game. We saw Clelin Ferrell as that starter, setting the edge in the run game. And then when it was a pass down on third down, in came Drake Jackson. And just that rotation between those two. And I think when you look at what we learned in terms of, we're going to get to Brock Purdy in just a second, but I think the other thing we learned is that this 49ers defense is really good. We already knew they were good, but all those questions and those concerns that crept up during the offseason, I think were answered, in particular with their run defense and that whole defensive line. I look at this defensive line. I've said it a number of times. This defensive line is going to be just as good, if not better, than they've been over these last couple of years. And I understood the reasoning behind the questions. People were concerned because they saw the 49ers lose Charles Omenihu. They saw him lose Samson Ebukam. They saw him lose Jordan Willis. And so they saw 3 defensive ends leave. And it's like, whoa, what are they going to do? And then the 49ers go out and they sign in free agency. They bring in Clelin Ferrell, and most 49er fans look at Clelin Ferrell because he was with the Raiders and he was a top draft pick that hadn't panned out as a guy that wasn't good. When really, Ferrell's a good player. He just was drafted way too high. If he was taken in the second, third round, maybe even into the first round, I don't think people would have the same point of view of him. It's very similar to the discussion that we're going to have here in a second about the 49ers quarterback, Brock Purdy. If Brock Purdy was a first-round quarterback, the entire discussion around him is different too. So, so sometimes people get caught up in the draft status. Ferrell, a guy who went early, it just didn't work out for him in Las Vegas, and that's not his fault that he got overdrafted there. And as Lee points out, Paris Harrelson has passed away. That's true. Rest in peace, Paris. That was a few years back, and the 49ers had a lot of guys. Like Shane says again, those guys weren't stars when they got here. The 49ers make people better and surround them with success, and that's right. Charles Omenihu and Jordan Willis were guys who were mid-round draft picks of the teams that they were on, and when they came to San Francisco through trades, nobody really thought much about that whole thing, and yet they were able to come in and be solid depth pieces for the 49ers. And right now, not Charles Omenihu, excuse me, but Samson Ebukam, he was brought in to be that free agent guy off the edge that was going to be your player on the opposite of Nick Bosa. And now you've got Clelin Ferrell in that role, teaming up with Drake Jackson to really fill that spot. And then, behind them, Kerry Hyder and Austin Bryant. And you look back at this game, Kerry Hyder with a sack, Austin Bryant with some good pressure at times. The 49ers defensive line, I just thought, dominated thoroughly in the run game, in the passing game as well. They did a very nice job of getting up the field. That whole pass, that whole defensive line, all those concerns again about that defensive line, I think we realized that there was a little bit of an overreaction this offseason. I know it's just one game, but this is with Nick Bosa, with Eric Armstead, and with Javon Hargrave inside that three, that's going to be a really tough unit to block. And then you throw on Clelin Ferrell, who's not a bad pass rusher, but even better against the run, and Drake Jackson coming off. And between the two of them, taking those other snaps, I think that's really going to help this group out. And Javon Kinlaw even had a couple of nice plays on Sunday. The one play where Fred Warner blows up Najee Harris in the backfield, that's all set up by Javon Kinlaw taking on two blockers at the point of attack. So I think for me, one of the biggest things that we learned, again, was don't overreact to the preseason, and don't overreact to some of the moves that are being made in terms of players leaving and acquisitions coming in of names that you haven't quite heard of, or people who haven't been successful in other places. Because as Shane pointed out earlier, the 49ers have shown the ability to coach guys up and get more out of them than anywhere else. So I think maybe it's coming out of a little homerish or what have you, but this 49er coaching staff, I think you need to give them a lot of credit, because this is a group with getting people set up and getting ready to go. Randy Milken, member of the Toolbox, jumps in. People need to see what Brock did at Iowa State. He turned that team around and set a lot of school records. Yeah, absolutely. Brock Purdy was a major reason why Iowa State all of a sudden started winning a lot of games when he took over at quarterback there. And let's transition to that, because that's what the topic started off with, right? The topic starts off with what we learned about Brock Purdy and the 49ers. So let's go ahead. Let's get into it. Brock Purdy, couple of things, I've talked about this quite a bit. We have there's just been so many negative narratives around Brock Purdy this offseason. From the moment that, and it started, I don't know about all of you, but I know for me, it started the day after the NFC Championship game. Because if you remember, I on my channel, you probably didn't follow it, but I'd go on another channel every Monday morning following the 49er games. I did about a 15-minute little hit with somebody else, and I would go over there, every Monday, like I said, after the games, and I distinctly remember that morning, because the topic wasn't about Brock Purdy, how well he done that year. It was all about, from beginning that day after that loss, Brock Purdy's down. They may have to go to another quarterback. And the discussion right away on that channel became all about Trey Lance. It was all about Trey Lance and how Trey Lance could beat out Brock Purdy coming into this year. And I told the host, no, it's going to be Brock Purdy. Well, Jack, why do you think that? Look at what he just did. He went out there, he throws the ball with anticipation, he makes plays, does all these things, and it just became a back and forth. And from there we ended up hearing about the whole dink and dunk narrative. And there's just all these talk about him. The dink and dunk, doesn't have the biggest arm, doesn't have this, doesn't have that. There's all these things about Brock Purdy that make him not a good quarterback. And then and people are talking about this. It's all over social media. It's all over YouTube as well, depending on which channels you're following. And we get to the the discussion in the offseason wasn't even just that. It was, hey, how about we just let Brock rest? There's no reason to rush Brock back. We don't need to get Brock here. Why don't we just give Trey the first 4 weeks of the season? Let's give Trey 4 weeks. Let's see what he can do. And I don't know. On this channel, one of the things I kept saying is I've been a proponent of Brock Purdy because it was pretty clear from the jump how good this guy was. When you watched him, especially when I say from the jump, I'm saying from the time he stepped in against Miami. He had looked good during the preseason to an extent, had made some bad mistakes. And so the thing with him is he'd move the offense in the preseason, then he'd make a boneheaded throw. But he came on, and when he came into that game against Miami, by that point, he'd been around the team long enough. I think that he had a better idea of the game plan, better idea of what this offense was. I think it was best for Brock Purdy that he didn't start earlier in the season, that they had Jimmy Garoppolo there, and Brock Purdy didn't have the jump in week 2 to start, and not start, but take over in that game and then go make his first start in week 3. I think waiting until allowing him to wait until week 13 for all that to occur helped him out, just like it had helped out Trey Lance the year before back in 2021. But you look at the numbers for Brock Purdy, and like Karen says, Brock doesn't get respect because of where he was drafted. It's just ridiculous. Brady was a 6th rounder. The best person is going to play. The coaches know, and the coaches did know. And you watch the play, you watch what he can do on the field. Brandon saying that Purdy's height reminds him of Doug Flutie Flakes, the point guard, can scramble, distribute, sharp. And Clark said Purdy does a good job manipulating the pocket. That's 100%. You watch the game on Sunday, Purdy knows what's going on, and he does a couple of things: moving around in the pocket, so moving in the pocket, manipulating the pocket, however you want to say. That's good. Brock Purdy also does a really good job of manipulating defenders with his eyes, moving people from side to side, getting the ball out of his hand with anticipation, all those types of things, And then the other part of it, we talk about this whole dink and dunk narrative that came out. The whole dink and dunk thing, the reason that I've always pushed back on that is, and it showed up all over this game against the Pittsburgh Steelers, is that Brock Purdy is going to take the longer throw. He's not going to just take the check down when there's a better throw open. And so he takes those, and he hits like Deebo Samuel, for example, it was a 22-yard completion, hits him about 15 yards over the middle. But if you watch that play from behind yesterday on the film review here on the channel, you can see him move a linebacker, and as soon as that linebacker turns his hips, he comes right back to the middle, delivers the ball to Samuel. It's not a perfect throw; it's a little bit behind him, but it's a good play by Brock Purdy, and so that's that part of it. And then the other part of it is, there's this dink and dunk thing, and like trying to make it that he's throwing. He's so good because of all the throws that he's making behind a line of scrimmage or short. Well, on Sunday, Brock Purdy threw the ball 12 times beyond 10 yards down the field. I watched last night the Buffalo Bills, Josh Allen, who everybody loves because Josh Allen's big and strong, has an arm that can throw the ball 70 yards down the field and can do all these things. Josh Allen threw the ball a number of times last night, over 40 times, but only 13 of his throws went beyond 10 yards or went to 10 yards or beyond. So when you look at Josh Allen's numbers from last night, all those attempts that he had, but he only had one pass travel 10 yards or more, only one more than Brock Purdy in that game. And I don't know. I see the people who have been as Shane says in the super chat here, kind of the Debbie Downers on Brock Purdy. I see that, and you'll see that you're going to see them start to come around because they can't just keep beating a dead horse. And I think the biggest thing on all of this negativity around it was, I don't, I think the guy that said it best was Steve Young, right? Steve Young this offseason went, he was up in Tahoe to play in a golf tournament up there, and he sat down with Matt Miyoko. And I think that Steve Young said it best because, there's just all the talk we've seen about Purdy, and he summed it up really well. And I'll read it off real quick. And this is what Steve Young had to say. If you forgot what he said when it came to the quarterback, he said, "It's easy to say last pick in the draft at his size, arm strength, and everything else, all these limitations. When talking about Brock Purdy, I don't think you should speak that way because I think he's the kind of guy who's going to make you look like a dummy." Let me repeat that one more time. This is Steve Young, Hall of Fame NFL quarterback of the San Francisco 49ers, who a lot of people respect. "It's easy to say last pick in the draft at his size, arm strength, and everything else that's limitations regarding Brock Purdy. When talking about Brock Purdy, I don't think you should speak that way because I think he's the kind of guy who's going to make you look like a dummy." And again, dink and dunk, limited, pick out whatever the narrative that's been negative this offseason that you want to talk about or you want to hit on, and it's all there for you, right? Let's look at what Brock Purdy did on Sunday against the Pittsburgh Steelers. These are just his throws beyond 10 yards. So these are throws to 10 plus. Remember, he threw the ball 29 times. Not all of those were targeted. Some of them throw away, some of them broken up, those kind of things. And so on throws of 10 or more yards down the field, Brock Purdy on Sunday against the Pittsburgh Steelers, 10 to 12, 161 yards, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions. Solid performance. And if you want to even go further than that, I saw somebody put out some stats showing throws beyond 15 yards plus. So extending it a little bit. Brock Purdy had 5 throws of 15 yards or more. That was the 12th highest percentage of throws at that distance in the league in week 1. 12th highest. 5 of them out of the 29 were traveled at least 15 yards down the field. He completed 4 of those. He was 4 or 5. So 80% of his throws that went beyond 15 yards in the air. We can throw all the stats that we want. We can talk about this till we're blue in the face. And like Randall says here, throw out all the stats to prove that Purdy is for real, but the hater's going to hate because they have other reasons for the negative takes. And that's 100% accurate. I've said that a number of times. It's easy to understand why. It's easy to understand why. Just like the gentleman that I was on with the day after the NFC Championship game, talking to me about how good Lance was going to be and so on. And this has been going on for a while anyway, right? It started with Jimmy Garoppolo, transitioned over to it was anybody but Jimmy for years. And then once it became anybody but Jimmy, it became all about Lance. And then, unfortunately that just didn't work out for Trey. And Brock Purdy's come on and he's stolen the show. Like I said, 10 to 12, 161, 2 touchdowns. Watch the film. Listen to people who know more than you. I think that's the biggest thing. And that's one of the things. I feel like I know a lot about football. Been around the game for 40 years, a little over. Played, coached, done everything really other than work in the NFL as a coach there. But even I know that I don't know everything about what's going on because I'm not in the huddle. I don't know the plays. And I'll take the word of a guy like Steve Young. I'll take the word of Kurt Warner. I'll take a word of Jeff Garcia. I'll listen to all those guys. I'll listen to the coaches that talk about the game. I'll listen to the people. I choose to listen to people who I know more than me instead of argue back with them. And I don't always have to necessarily agree with them at first, but generally, if you take the time and you listen to what they're saying and you put that into action, it comes out pretty strong and it's pretty clear. Brock Purdy, everybody all the quarterbacks, everybody that you heard talk about Brock Purdy talked about how good this guy was going to be, and he excels. What he does so well is, I pointed out a minute ago, it's that anticipation. It's understanding what's happening, being able to use his eyes to move defenders, understanding that when this guy comes here, that hole's going to be open, so I can get rid of the ball now, even though the receiver's not there, I can get it to him. Or this, I want to go to this hole, it's not there, I just need to slide to the left a little bit and hit the second window throw like he did to Deebo Samuel to open up the second half. There's just all kinds of things that he does. And I think where Brock, and I've said this a number of times, I'll probably keep saying it until people finally decide that they're going to believe in Purdy, is where Brock, I think part of the reason that people don't give him a lot of respect is he makes it look too easy. I think that's the biggest thing. It doesn't look hard. What Brock Purdy does on the field, it doesn't look hard. Drops back to pass, and there's guys that are wide open, sure. And there's other times where he's got a guy right in his face. Like, there's one play in the game on Sunday, he drops back to pass. He's got TJ Watt coming right up the middle at him, and he rips a throw to Brandon Ayuk, for a big game. A little bit later on, again, pressure coming off the right side, and he just slides to the left, and he hits Ayuk for another big game. And you just saw those chunk plays throughout. The only thing that I would say with Brock Purdy is that, yeah, he's definitely aggressive, wanting to get to that second level. Talked about this yesterday in the film breakdown. There's a couple of times where he's really aggressive going to that second level throw, when if he just takes the first level throw to Deebo Samuel on one of them, it's probably going to be a first down. I'm talking about the one that he's trying to hit Juwan Jennings on. Those types of things. It's Randall's a pretty smart guy, and I'm glad that he's a member of the toolbox. He says Brock's ability to process in split seconds and know where to go, timing and anticipation makes him special. And it really is. And that's, again, it's somewhat like that's kind of like Tom Brady, right? And Tom Brady was a guy that he wasn't physically the most gifted guy in the world. He wasn't going to move with his legs very well. He could move, but he wasn't going to scare anybody with his running ability. But he had it up here, and he was able to do enough and move around in the pocket enough to really win there. And I think the other thing with Purdy that this goes that's underappreciated about Purdy's game is his feet. He's not a guy who's going to, there's this thought that mobile quarterbacks are the way to go, that you need a mobile quarterback in today's day and age to win the Super Bowl. That's kind of what we've been hearing. I've been hearing a lot of that. In today's day and age, you need a mobile quarterback to win, yada, yada, yada. You can't just sit in the pocket and win. And that's right on the money. You do need a guy that's mobile, but there's a difference. And I think what's happened is that people have fallen under this impression that you need a running quarterback or a guy that's really good runner, instead of a guy that has the ability to move around with his legs, has that athletic ability, but can still make those throws in the pocket, has that ability when things totally break down to get out and make a play. And that's different. And that's where, everybody talks about like Patrick Mahomes, and Patrick Mahomes to me isn't a running quarterback. Patrick Mahomes' best ability for me is his ability to move around, use his legs, and still make the plays. Yeah, he's going to rip off a long run like he did in the Super Bowl every once in a while, that kind of thing. But where he's the best is when he can move, when he's got, his ability to slide out, get out of the pocket and make a throw, stuff like that. We've seen Brock Purdy do this stuff. We saw Brock Purdy on Sunday against the Steelers. Pressure off the left side, unblocked guy, spins out, gets away, slides to his left. He's actually running to his left, makes the throw to Deebo, and it's a hell of a catch by Samuel on the back end, because it's not a very good throw. It's off the mark, and Samuel's out here making a really nice grab, right? Or 3rd and 12, drop back to pass. There's all this stuff going on in front of him, sliding over, takes off running, makes the guy miss, and he picks up 18 yards. Or even earlier in the game, drops back to pass. There's some pressure. He starts to slide to his right. The TJ Watt, or the defensive end that's being blocked by Colton McKivitz, gets upfield, slides up underneath that, steps forward, and he rips the throw to Brandon Ayuk for a big gain down the middle. Not a big gain, but a gain of like 15, 16. I'm considering that a big gain. So, that's the kind of stuff that we see with Brock Purdy that I think really helps separate him. And I think that's why he's special. As Terradome says here, Brock got those spidey senses, and I agree. I do. I think he just understands what's happening around him. And the other thing, and I don't see him in the comments section, but I had somebody that follows the channel this morning sending me a couple of messages asking about, if I noticed certain things with Purdy, and what his comment was just about how calm and poised he was throughout the game. And that's the other thing too, when it comes to Brock Purdy and his performance. He just you watched him on Sunday, and it's just like he's out there playing with the guys. Just like didn't seem like there was any stress on him. It just seemed like he was, going at it. There was one play where there's something bad happening, and you can kind of see him look like he's yelling to the sideline. Like, yeah, I know I screwed up, or yeah, I know we screwed up there, or what have you, and it's not perfect. But I think that's the other thing when it comes to Purdy is he has that ability he's got that FU to him. We saw that with the whole deal with Patrick Peterson, but he has it with the head coach. And I think the thing is, Kyle Shanahan's very hard on their quarterbacks. And I think that Brock Purdy has enough self-confidence and a self-belief in himself that he can take all of that from Kyle Shanahan, and it doesn't bother him, because at the end of the day, he's in control on the field, and feels like he's going to do what he needs to do to get it done. And it's an interesting process. And, talked about all the other things with Purdy and how well he played, the things that he's done. First quarterback ever to have a pass rating over 95 in their first 6 starts. First quarterback in the history of the NFL to have at least 2 touchdowns in each of their first 6 starts. Just I know that this has been a discussion throughout the offseason, and at some point I'll stop talking about all the negativity from other people. But and I think I've said this before. And I know that I said this recently, but we're in a position right now watching the 49ers. The 49ers are in a position right now with the guy that they have at quarterback, the guy that they have at coach, the talent they have on the defensive side of the ball. If you're not old enough to remember what it was like to watch the 49ers from 1981 to 1990, you're kind of in that area now. The 49ers have been really good for the last 4 years. 3 years, 3 of the 4. They go to a Super Bowl. They go to back-to-back NFC championship games. I think we're in a spot right now where, as you watch the 49ers, as long as Brock Purdy's healthy, this is a team that's going to win a lot of games, because he has that ability to Brandon Ayuk's a tremendous wide receiver, Deebo Samuel, Christian McCaffrey, especially with his running ability. You have all this talent around him, but even without Deebo last year, how good he played and all these kind of things. And I just have a feeling that he can play really well. So Brock Purdy, we already knew all this stuff about Brock Purdy. I think what we learned about Brock Purdy, though, if I wanted to go back and just say one thing that we learned, and this is another thing that we heard all off season, was wait till the opposition has the entire off season to study the film and start the game plan against this guy. As soon as teams let them all, they're going to have all this. And what happens? Pittsburgh Steelers had all offseason. They had months to prepare for this game against the San Francisco 49ers. They had a defensive back come out and say that the 49ers have all these tells on the 49ers offense. They went out and they put up 30 points. The only turnover was a fumble on a sack. I mean, it just everything that people have said about this guy in the offseason has turned up to be bogus. And again, like I said, just kind of going through it, looking at, I want to repeat it one more time, and then I'm going to move on to the defensive side a little bit more. But I do want to I want to go back to this quote one more time, because I think that it just hits it right on the head. And Steve Young's way smarter than me. And he said, remember, this was back in June around June, May, June. It's easy to say last pick in the draft at his size, arm strength, and everything else, there's limitations. When talking about Brock Purdy, I don't think you should speak that way because I think he's the kind of guy who's going to make you look like a dummy. And right now, I feel like there's a lot of dummies that do this who have been talking shit about Brock Purdy all off season. And the fun thing is that now, as this season goes along, you're going to see that narrative change. You're going to see it all be brought around full circle. All of them were big Brock Purdy fans. They were all supportive of Brock Purdy. They all liked him all along, even though they talked shit about him all off season, and they came up with every narrative that they could come up with in terms of different stats that they could use, whatever. We saw it. So Brock Purdy, that's what we learned about him. Doesn't matter what happens in terms of film, all those kind of things. This guy's going to be an elite quarterback in the NFL. Like Steve Young said, he's going to make some of you guys look like dummies. Beyond that, we talked about the defense, and I think that's the other thing, really, right? I think that defensive side of the ball was spectacular. Again, we didn't know who Steve Wilks was going to be. We didn't know what he was going to look like. Steve Wilks came out, and in his first game with a full game plan, I talked about it for about the first 10 minutes of this show. But this first game, at least, dominating performance. Pass rush, he blitzed a lot early on. I saw some stats where he had blitzed about half the time over that first few series of the game, and then he kind of backed off that as the game went along. You know, when you're up 17 or 20 points in the game, things change a little bit on the defensive side. And in watching the film today, the one thing that I noticed on the touchdown drive that the Steelers had at the end of the first half, a lot of soft coverage by the corners, a lot of zone type stuff, allowing them to try to get up underneath. The big play in that whole series was the Najee Harris run, and that's just a bad job by Deommodore Lenoir, not being able to set the edge, allowing that thing to bounce outside. But beyond that, Glass City coming in with a good super chat here to kind of save the day when it comes to the defensive side says, what did you think of Lenoir, Oliver, and Ambry? Their catch of target numbers weren't great according to PFF. I think when you look at it, I felt like, well, Isaiah Oliver didn't get in the game till late. You had Deommodore Lenoir lined up in the slot, Ambry Thomas on the corner, and then Charvarius Ward on the other side. I felt like in watching the game watching the game live, watching the film, I felt like they did a really good job. The catches that they're giving up are things that were mostly in front of them, where they're playing, again, like Ambry Thomas, he's lined up 8, 9, 10 yards off the receiver, dropping back right at the snap. And it'd be one thing if it was just him, but in watching the film, you can see that he's in that position, but so is Charvarius Ward, both of them playing well off. They're just playing soft. They just want to keep everything in front of them because they want to force Pittsburgh to work their way down the field. So, Pittsburgh did really well in garbage time. It was 20-0 at the end of the first half. Yeah, it's not garbage time technically, but that game was pretty much over. It was definitely over by the time Pittsburgh got the ball for the first time in the second half. I mean, you see that in the fact that they only ran the ball 10 times and all those types of things. But I felt like Lenoir and Ambry Thomas played well. Isaiah Oliver, not too much. And then, in terms of the one big run, Lenoir messes up, lets him get to the outside, gets too far inside. The runner bounces around him. Then he gets upset about that and, makes the hit out of bounds. So you get a 50. It's a long run plus another 15 yards. I felt like the holding call or the call on him down in the red zone later on that same drive on Lenoir was a bad call. He definitely wasn't more than 5 yards past the line of scrimmage. So I felt like that was a close one. It's a ticky-tack one, but I think it was good. And as he says the same thing. They were keeping everything in front. When you watched early on, they were in tight coverage. They backed off as the score got big. They just don't want to let anything get over the top. They wanted to force Pittsburgh to use up a lot of time, and they did a really good job of that. So that was a big positive there. And then beyond that, again, like I said earlier in the show, I think we already knew that Fred Warner and Dre Greenlaw were the best linebackers in the game, so we didn't learn anything new there. But what we learned about the defensive front, again, was that, yes, they lost 3 defensive ends, but the 3 that they brought in to replace them, the guys that they brought in on the back end on that to replace those guys, one of them starting. Samson Ebicom's gone. Clelin Ferrell in. And I don't think the Flyers have lost anything at all. I think, if anything, they might have even gotten better in terms of setting the edge there with Clelin Ferrell. I really like 94. And like I said, the Beast Rider gave me a little tip on that when we were out in Vegas. So that was helpful. And then, Drake Jackson, he's going to be, he's like I said after the game, he's the guy that comes in after the mess is made up, and he's the guy that cleans it up. He's the guy you're going to get pressure from Nick Bosa and Javon Hargrave and Eric Armstead. They're going to, like the first sack of the game for Jackson. That's all Eric Armstead. Eric Armstead gets up the field. He's the guy putting pressure on him that forces the quarterback to bail, and then Jackson cleans it up and gets the sack. The other thing that I noticed from watching the game is the Pittsburgh Steelers really were going to make sure that Nick Bosa didn't get a sack. There was one play in particular. I think it was the sack it was either the sack by Hargrave or the sack by Drake Jackson. But on that play, there were 3 guys from the Pittsburgh offense paying attention to Nick Bosa. He was being triple teamed on that play. All the other guys one-on-one, and they got the sack. And you're going to see that all year long. If teams are going to take away Nick Bosa, if they're going to force other guys to win, the 49ers have those guys to win. Javon Hargrave and Eric Armstead, those guys in the middle, especially with the attention that if teams keep giving the kind of attention to Bosa that we saw on Sunday, those guys in the middle are going to be extremely important, because there's nothing. Quarterbacks are okay with guys coming around the edge. They don't want anybody to hit them, right? But it's really that when you get pressure up the middle and you get that up into your face, that's really what causes problems for a quarterback. They really hate that kind of stuff. And so that interior pass rush that the 49ers added this year, coupled with the presence of Bosa taking up defenders all by himself, these other guys are going to get to work. It's going to be a really tough pass rush all season long. I think that's what we learned about him. The other thing we learned is, again, when it comes to the preseason, don't overreact to it. All the talk about Jake Moody. Moody comes out, he hits 6 field goals, nails them. Jake Moody had been perfect in Santa Clara. He missed 1 or 2 kicks during training camp, but beyond that, he was nails. And it was just a matter of him getting into the game, being comfortable and relaxing. He did that on Sunday, hit all 6 of his field goals. Nowadays, it's not like back in the early 90s where an extra point was just, from the 10, just a little chip shot. Now it's an actual field goal. I think it was at 32 yards, 37 yards, something like that. So I thought that he was good as well. I do want to, there was always drip 805 says, Jack Hammer, why did the 49ers work out a quarterback today? Aren't all the practice squad spots filled? Yeah, the 49ers brought in Ian Book today for a workout. I haven't seen who else they brought in. My feeling is that it wasn't just Ian Book. Typically, when you have a quarterback come in to work out, they're also going to bring in wide receivers and running backs and maybe even a tight end. They're going to bring in other guys to work out. If you recall, back during, I think it was during the offseason program, might have been right at the beginning. Yeah, it was back during the offseason program. The 49ers had brought in a quarterback at that point to come in and work out. And everybody's wondering about this guy. And the real reason that they brought this guy in to work out was because they were working out wide receivers and they needed somebody to throw, because they're not going to use the guys that are on the roster to throw to. Same thing here. I think, they could be bringing Ian Book in because they want to get a little bit of intel on him just in case they need it. But also they're going to bring in other guys. So they bring in a bunch of players throughout the season to take a look at them. A lot of these guys aren't going to get signed, but they're going to bring them in and they're going to take a look and, they'll take notes. And let's say something happens and the Flyers need to add a quarterback, or they say they want to add a 4th quarterback, bring somebody else to the practice squad because somebody is going to fall off. Then you make a move like that. So, Ian Book, I think when you look at Ian Book, that book's already been written. He's not a guy that's going to, if you're getting to Ian Book and you've got to play him in a game, that's not very good there. So Anyway, again, what we learned week one, Brock Purdy, just as good as he was last year. Guy's going to be, I think it's just a stud in the NFL. This defensive line, all the worries there, I think are really for naught. This is a really good defensive line as well. Hey, one of those guys that was rushing the passer was actually on the practice squad, Austin Bryant. He's out there chasing the quarterback around on Sunday. So, this is just the 49ers. We've said it all off season. The San Francisco 49ers have one of the deepest and best rosters in the NFL. As long as they keep their quarterback back upright, this is a team that's going to go to the Super Bowl. I think they can win it. We'll see. The other thing that we got to remember too, we always talk about overreaction Monday, and we got to not overreact to week one. And it's just week one, but week one is, it's our first glimpse of it. Week one sometimes can be a little weird for the 49ers that look like they were just handling their business though. We'll see. We'll see how it progresses. We'll see what happens. They're going down to Los Angeles to take on the Rams. The Rams scored 30 points up in Seattle. So both these teams coming into week two, coming off games in which they scored 30 points. 49ers is a big game. It's week two. It's a big game for the 49ers. Second road game for them. First home game of the season for the Rams. And the 49ers defense is going to get tested more in this game than they were last week because they're going to face a quarterback that's actually good. So that's the other difference too. There's a big difference between Matthew Stafford and Kenny Pickett, right? Kenny Pickett, Matthew Stafford. I'm going to go out on a limb. I'm going to say Matthew Stafford's the better quarterback there. I'm just guessing. So we'll see how it plays out. Peter Pern says that they're worried about the right side, though. I need to protect Brock. If he goes down, then we're screwed. Yeah, I understand. I understand that concern a little bit. There's going to be some tough games in that regard. You got to remember that the 49ers aren't going to be facing, TJ Watt week after week. And I would be a little concerned. I think that, Spencer Burford he struggled as well. So it definitely wasn't just one guy. So Jimbo wants you guys to make sure you smash that like button. And I think it's going to be interesting. Randall says Stafford won't have time to use that rocket arm, all those kind of things. And we're going to get into that. But just again, really to kind of wrap up this show, though, we learned that Brock Purdy's the real deal. We learned that as far as the defense goes, don't overreact to what you see in the preseason. We learned that Jake Moody can kick the ball pretty well. We learned that defensive line still gets after the quarterbacks, even with all the new guys that they brought in. Steve Wilkes, at least for week one, did a hell of a job with that 49ers defense. And I think that this is a team that's going to be right there in the hunt for the Super Bowl. I would probably put them as one of the top. I think if they can play the home field and they get Philadelphia at home in the NFC Championship game, I think I'd put them as the winner. It might even be the Dallas Cowboys after what we saw with that defense on Sunday. And then Shane Marino with the super chat. Concerned with the CMC usage? Use Mason. It's week one. It's week one. There was a point there when it was 27-0. Doesn't necessarily need to be out there. Yeah, use Christian McCaffrey a little bit more. Not Christian McCaffrey. Use Jordan Mason more. Use Elijah Mitchell more and all that kind of stuff. So not sure exactly what the thought process there. We'll get a chance tomorrow to speak with Kyle Shanahan before practice, and we'll see if that comes up. So, again, really quick, preseason, don't overreact to it. Brock Purdy's the guy. This defense is for real. Take it for what it's worth, everybody. Thank you all so much for tuning in tonight. If you can do me a favor, hit that like button before you leave. If you're not already subscribed to the channel, please do so. And then after you subscribe, make sure you turn on your notifications because I'm not on at the same time all the time. And that way you don't miss any of the updates right here on Inside the 49ers with Jack Hammer. So thank you all so much for tuning in. I really appreciate everybody that's in the comment section, all of those members of the toolbox, all the super chats and everything else. Thank you all so much. Have a